Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of Billing the Teach. I am joined today by the always exuberant Tim Sermak, who is no stranger to personalized learning, but we want to hear how it's going this year with adding a bit more personalized learning. And more specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about the grid method today. So first of all, Tim, what department are you in? What do you teach? How long have you been teaching?
Is this live? This is live, right? So I can't.
Oh, we're live.
We're live. This is going out to the world. So hi, I'm Tim, and I'm a teachaholic. That's probably not funny. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So I teach social studies. So I'm in the social studies department here at Grays Lake North, and I tend not to get out of my classroom here. I'm in A249, and the social studies department's right below me, so I don't really see as many people as I would like to. So, yeah, so I've been teaching. This is my 22nd year teaching. I think that's right, 22nd. I lost count. And so, but my 7th year here at Grays Lake North. So I've spent almost a third of my career here, which was weird to me to think about, but yeah.
That is a crazy thought when you start to break it up like that. So, as we said, you're no stranger to personalized learning. I feel like for as long as I've always been talking to you about teaching stuff, it's usually around some cool idea in which you're kind of personalizing the learning in your classroom a little bit more. But this year you dove in and just went all out on the grid method. So my first question is, why? What made you want to make that switch?
I think I was really all in on the grid method. I mean, I know that you're the English teacher, but just I don't know that matters. So I think for me, how much context do you want me to provide? I think the idea that our education system was conceived and established during an industrial era with an Enlightenment model of what intelligence meant, right? So like, an academic model of this is what it means to be smart, is always been sort of the framework behind the stuff that I've done. I've always thought like we could do this better for kids in the 21st century, than what we're currently doing. It didn't make sense to me to go lockstep, to sort of march kids through a curriculum lockstep. I remember when I was early in my career, I had a parent ask me a question like, so what's the point of moving on in the curriculum if the student demonstrated that they didn't understand the material? And I was like a second year teacher. I was like, I'm just doing a good job. Like, what do you mean? So that really that hit me kind of hard, and I really thought about, well, what is the point? Like, if the kid doesn't understand what the Great Depression was, or the New Deal, or the whatever the causes of the Civil War are, like, why do I keep moving through the curriculum if they didn't understand that? And so that sort of changed my thinking about what we needed to do. And so I always was trying to figure out ways to have students demonstrate mastery of what they knew in different ways, but then also individualize the speed at which they did it. And so there's always differentiation and universal design for learning, sort of like how do we make it accessible to all students in all ways, without sort of trying to retrofit the curriculum for students who might have special needs or students who can move at a faster pace. So so that led to experiments in mastery-based assessments and mastery-based sort of grading, which is different than standards-based grading in my head. Just as a quick plug, right? Because the standards are the standards, and mastery is how can students demonstrate that they've met those standards.
Right.
So I played with that a little bit, and I've played with a lot of different like sort of student-driven and student-led project work, and the grid method. Was a great way for me to tie that together. So in individualizing, I think I'm always trying to figure out how to personalize learning, and so the grid is, I think, certainly a nice transition into a more individualized, which is different than personalized, but more individualized approach to student sort of progress through content, because it allows you to get through to different depths. Not everybody's going to get to all the different depths. Kids are going to work at their own space, but they can show minimum levels of proficiency in the content while developing skills. So it seemed like a really great way to kind of tie all this together if I have to teach within the strictures of a certain curriculum.
Right. No, I like that a lot. And something you said there that just kind of stuck with me was your, like you always kind of done these things, and I'm kind of wondering, so like, what was it the catalyst of the pandemic that just kind of made you jump more in on it, you think?
Well, I think, yeah, to me, the pandemic is, I hope that it will be an accelerant for change in the way that we work with students. We have so much technology that makes individualization of education and personalization of education possible.
Right.
So to me, because we had to make adaptations for how we worked with students in this pandemic setting, it was like, well, we have to try a bunch of stuff. Let's just try it, because right now, without evaluations and without final exams that kids have to worry about, we can remove some of those stressors. There are other stressors that we have to worry about, but we can remove some of those other stressors over which we have control. And that allows us to maybe feel a little bit more comfortable in taking risks. I know that within with all these other things that are layered in during the pandemic, not everybody felt that way, and that's fine. Like there's no judgment on that. To me, it just seemed like an opportunity to be able to go in and just really mess around under the hood and see what I could accomplish in trying to move towards a more personalized approach. So the pandemic, in some ways, while it was stressful and difficult, like offered opportunities I thought that were really useful to take advantage of.
All right, that's a great point. It's like we're making those changes anyways. Why not do it even more so in the right direction? So how's it like? I want to see some of these grids. Let's show. I think you said the geography grid. Like let's pop that one up right away on the screen. Let's see what we got. Let me make it so that you can share that. Go for it.
Let me share my screen. So so I'm new to the grid, right? So this is the first time I've really used grids to help students move through the material. And like I said, it's been a very useful way. I think the thing that really helped me the most was that when we've done understanding by design, and we've done backwards planning, and we've done all of our curriculum maps, and those are sort of like 50,000 feet in the air, kind of looking. What the grid did that was really helpful for me was that I could really see it better from a student perspective about, here's where they're going to need some support here, or they're going to need a bit of information here. And then using things like Edpuzzle or Newsela or Flipgrid or any of the sort of tools that we have available to us, allow kids to kind of work at their own pace and give formative assessments along the way. So, and plus, the thing I liked additionally was just the idea that I could really sort of figure out where kids are and where they might be struggling, and group them accordingly as they sort of work their way through the grid. And then it helped kids, see it. I think one of the things that I needed to do that I learned from this process was that, especially for students who might have IEPs or might need things broken down a little bit, like really being specific with them. Okay, today you're going to work on 1A, and then you're going to do these two things. And well, I can get into that stuff later, where I see this and I go, oh, this makes a whole lot of sense to me. But if kids are seeing it for the first time, they struggled with it a little bit, as we work through it. But most students didn't have much of an issue. So I like the depth of knowledge approach too. So this is the geography grid, and I've never taught geography here at Grays Lake North. So wrestling with that curriculum map and trying to make sense of it during the pandemic, I figured this might be a great time to try it. So level one was just, here's the stuff you need to know about physical geography. So this was the first unit that we did. So it was a physical geography unit. Kids needed to know about landforms, waterways, latitude and longitude, different types of maps, 5 themes of geography. So it's really just, here it is. Here's the stuff you need to know. And then they took an assessment on it. And the assessment was basically a test or quiz. And when I was early in my career, I probably would have stopped there and been like, okay, here's your test, let's move on. But thinking about it using the grid helped me realize, okay, well, if kids really understand this stuff, they have to apply it. And so the second level was about application and demonstration. And so they had to do a couple of map activities to show me they actually really knew not just what different types of maps were, but how to use those different maps. And then I had them actually go in and create a Google My Map where they demonstrated an ability to, if they did the assignment right, demonstrate an ability to not only read maps, but to apply all of the different things they learned in level 1 within a map. So show me the different landforms, explain to me the climates based on the climate maps, explain to me how the different themes of geography are actually exist within the community in which they live. So they had to do a Lake County map. And so a lot of the latitude and longitude was relatively easy there, but they still had to show that they knew how to figure it out. And then the strategic thinking piece, is where level 3 comes in, and so it's sort of the next level up. Now they have to, on their own, without really a lot of guidance or support, like they've done it all, now go out and find an original piece of property based on some information that I give you, and then based on what you think you would like to do, so they have to be a little bit more strategic about how they demonstrate their knowledge. And then level 4 is the extended thinking piece, where it's students have to apply all of this in a different way. So they have to go out and say, okay, here's some information about climate change. How is the climate change going to affect the geography and vice versa? So they have to kind of and then it allows me to get to a writing piece where they have to make an argument based on what they learned through all of these different pieces where they do it. And students, again, are working at different paces, and the thing about the mastery-based grading piece, when you apply that to the grid, is that not all students are going to necessarily get to the extended 4 level, the level 4 extended thinking. And if they don't, that's okay, as long as they're, as far as the skills go, because I want them to do some writing. And so I'll build the writing, and then if it looks like students aren't going to...
That's cool.
Yeah, finish at that level, I'll do the writing piece at a lower level. And so that way they can still get their writing practice in and get that skills practice in. It's just modifying it based on where kids are progressing.
So something I'm hearing here that I think is worth noting, because it's kind of a hurdle I always hear from teachers, and even in my own thinking when I started doing this with broadcast a little bit, was that it's okay if they get a little separated in where they currently are on the grid, because you've created all this for personalization. Or individualization, as you were saying. And 2, and I want you to explain this a little bit more. It's okay if they don't get to the level 4. That's the goal, but you can still say there's some level of mastery going on, or not mastery, but
it's a proficiency to some extent. Right. Like they might not get an A in terms of the content because they're not demonstrating, above and beyond.
Right.
But simply getting to the apply and demonstrate level, if they get all the way through level 2, which is the minimum that I expect from every student, they've demonstrated that they can understand the concepts, and they've demonstrated that they can apply the concepts. Now, they might not, level 3 is just sort of a different way of thinking about it. Level 4 is an extended way of thinking about it. But as long as they get to level 2 and they're doing the writing, a student can still get, whatever based on the mastery rubrics that we have, or the continuum, as I call them. I can say, okay, here's where you are. This is what you demonstrated.
Right.
If you want to continue, you can, but the whole class is moving on. We got to move on to these other concepts now that everybody's moved through level 2. And so, that's kind of that's a nice thing about how that works is that I'm not penalizing students for not finishing everything, but still giving them opportunities to learn the content and learn the skills.
And I love the real world applications that were in there. So I know this from when you go in and you start to think about the grid, it's a great time to rethink some curriculum. It's a great time to think about your learning targets. And then when you go to implement, it gets a little bit dicey at first. And I know it because you're just not expecting some things right away. But what were some of the hurdles that you saw right away as you started implementing it with the kids, where I'm not going to steal what I think it might be. I want to see if maybe it's the same thing.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there were lots. When you make a transition like this, it's not always easy for me as a teacher, and I had to wrestle with a lot of this stuff to try to make sense of it for myself before I could give it to the students. By the time I gave it to them, I was like, this is so simple, it makes sense, and they're kind of looking at it.
Right, because you've been staring at it.
Right, yeah, and I built it, and I know it, and they look at it and go, I don't understand. And so it was an issue of getting them used to what does it mean, and then with the tracking sheet piece too, having them update the tracking sheet so that I knew where they were and they knew where they were, and we
do you have that to show really quick?
Yeah, it's so it's really fun.
I'll blur the names on the video if it shows. Gotta finish those safe schools today.
There it is, geography tracking sheet. Okay, so
Nice little Google hack there. I don't think a lot of people know they can do that. You start searching up there, and it gives you some of their documents. Yeah. Oh,
especially
cool.
it gives you all the recent stuff. So, and so this would be, so this is the class, and so the students all have access to this. One of the questions I had is like, well, is that okay? Can students are seeing where other students are? Like, is that okay? But in some ways, it holds students accountable. For students that are moving quickly through it, other students might feel bad at first, but at some point they're going to get caught up, and you can have those conversations with students. Students that are lagging, you have those conversations with them as well, and you can do that in one-on-one meetings. And so it's easier when kids are at home or remote.
Right.
Trying to have one-on-one meetings in the classroom is often difficult. So trying to carve that piece out of it is a little bit, has been a challenge, to say the least. To have those conversations with kids about where they might be struggling. And so, yeah, so the tracking sheet is nice because then students they get in the habit of, at the beginning of class, update the tracking sheet. Where are you? There's 5 different levels, so they're working on something. They have a question piece is something that I used for them, where I say, okay, if I have a question, I have a question means I have a question for you. And then students can put stuck or need help if they're struggling with it. And then when they finish it, they just mark it as need check. And so it allows them to sort of manage their pacing. It doesn't really necessarily help them manage their time any better because students will be as they are. I think one of the issues I have is you mentioned it before, just as kids are working sort of at their own pace. Kids are kind of all over the place. So some students are working in level 3 while some students are still wrapping up level 1. So getting used to giving up that control about where students could be was an interesting shift. It definitely took a little bit of a mindset shift.
Yeah.
To move from, okay, I'm in control of the information, to you're in control of the pacing. And then the second thing was about setting deadlines. Because if I'm allowing kids to work at their own pace, setting deadlines is a little bit difficult. So it's about having, the way that we worked through that was setting deadlines for individual students and saying, okay, well, you're working your own pace, that's fine, but this needs to be done by this time.
Very cool.
And other students, as they're moving through it quickly, or more quickly, one of the things that they tend to do as they move through, they say, oh, well, I'm way ahead, so I can ease off on this class because I'm way ahead of everybody else. And so then it's about how do we keep pushing that student to go further. And so sometimes on the grids, like there's a level 5 for independent investigation. I don't have that on that grid. I do on the economics grid that I use. So I developed one for economics, which one of the things that students struggled with was that level 4 was at the top and level 3 was at the bottom, or level 1 was at the bottom. And so that was something that, Chad, when he should,
right. Students aren't used to
starting at the bottom and working to the top. So with economics, I had a lot more success by flipping the grid, right? So, not flip grid, but flipping the grid. So I put level 1 at the top and then level 4 at the bottom. And kids seem to have a better understanding. There were a lot fewer questions in my economics class than there were in my geography class. But then level 5 is an independent investigation. So students who finished, like I had some students who wrapped up level 4 pretty early. So I said, okay, well then let's talk about money and money issues and budgeting with your parents. Like, how does what we're doing in class, compare to what the real world is like? And so there's a written reflection piece. And so that's where kids can demonstrate an additional level of mastery and extension. And I have that in every unit for the econ class as well. So those are some. The other hurdles then when I do have students who maybe have IEPs or even if it's 504s and with extended time, and this sort of addresses those issues because kids can work at their own pace and they can finish as far as they need to finish to demonstrate a minimum level of proficiency. But the grid makes sense to me, but it's a lot of words for some students, right? So they look at this and they might get overwhelmed. So it's about breaking it down even more and setting more class-specific deadlines and one-on-one meetings with students.
Those hurdles, the one that stands out to me is just that how students shift to how they're reading it. And the way I kind of phrased it with my broadcast students was, I'm showing you the end goal first. This is where I want you to be.
Right.
We work backwards to kind of get there. That it's a tricky shift for them for sure. So give me a small one, but what's a specific success you can think of with a student? Call it student A, where you're this kid really embraced it, or like you weren't expecting, like something for us to go, that's why we might want to do this?
Yeah, I would say in U.S. history, for example, you know, there were a number of students that we last semester I didn't use the grid, and then this semester I did, and so the students I think struggled with that shift. But once they understood both the tracking sheet and the grid, students were advocating for themselves more. I would say, if you want, like I can think of a specific student. So student A was advocating for himself a lot more, asking a lot more questions about the directions, about the material, and then expressing, you know, more interest in terms of like being more engaged, I guess would be the way to say it, in terms of like, oh, I can do this when I want or when I need to. And they were really, that student was really managing his time much more efficiently in class. It really was a lot more about, oh, I can do this at this pace, and I'm not worried about what everybody else is doing. I'm worried about where I am. And so that student was really comparing himself to himself in terms of growth. So it's about self-growth rather than focusing specifically on like, well, what did I get on that test, and how did everybody else do on that test, and am I smart or am I stupid? It's more about like, oh, I'm progressing through this. And it gave a lot of opportunities to give that student a lot of positive feedback, which that student needed, and start to feel better about being more successful in class. So it was really nice to see that student sort of take control of their learning. It allowed the student to do that.
That's really cool. That, you know, and I think that's the type of story that we want people to hear as to why you would want to try out the grid or make this shift, because that's how you want students to think about their learning. My last question for you, and this is kind of our shift towards, we got to start thinking about block coming up, you know. How do you see this being implemented next year? Do you see it continuing? Do you see it?
Oh yes.
Go ahead.
Most definitely. One of the things that really helped me this semester was the fact, like, so I have 4 preps. So I'm teaching 4 different classes, 2 of which I've never taught before here at Grays Lake North, and 1 I haven't taught in 3 or 4 years. And so it's like trying to manage a lot of, you know, different pieces. There's a lot of different moving pieces trying to manage students. So I don't think I would have been able to do it without the grid. So that's the first thing. So really help with the transition to a new system. And then the new system being the pandemic and having shorter classes and things like that. So when we move to block, to me, the mind shift, or the mindset shift that has to happen is more about like, you know, not trying to jam more information in, but giving students opportunities to work where you're facilitating that learning with them. And so in allowing for more individualized, so like in economics, kids are working in pairs or in small groups. So it works for that as well, because then you can have those conversations within the group about like who's struggling and who might be, you know, who might need some assistance, or they can work together to explain things to each other. Concepts. So the grid like allows me to be able to focus on the students as opposed to the lesson. So I'm much more like interested in student progress and student growth, as opposed to being like, okay, what do I have all my materials for this lesson? Do I have, you know, do I have my hook, and do I have this, and do I have to managing my time in a way where it's like, oh, I got 90 minutes to fill now.
Yeah.
For me, 90 minutes is not enough, and like you know, the hour that we have now during the pandemic, during hybrid, is like, okay, that flies. I can only meet with, you know, 4 or 5 students or 4 or 5 groups, because it's, you know, by the time we get started, by the time we have to end, it's tough. So thinking about this, allowing for more individualized pacing, allowing students to work in class, being able to give kids feedback live, as opposed to having to do it in a Google Doc or something, that I'm looking forward to see how that plays out.
Cool. What I like that you said there, that really is going to stick with me, is, you know, now the way we teach, or even how we used to teach with our timing, it was start, and you're thinking to yourself, we got one thing we want to get through, one major goal. And since this, with the longer time, you might be checking in with the kid several times. You might be telling a kid to go back. You're looking at these in those, not so much as time chunks, but these skill chunks almost.
Yeah. And one piece I'm hoping to really build in is for students to be setting their own goals about, okay, here's what they need to accomplish today. And then at the end, being reflective about, here's what I was able to accomplish And that piece I haven't quite figured out. We tried that a little bit last year with U.S. history to some success, and then the pandemic hit before I was able to really apply it. But I'd like to be able to build that piece in too, so that students are learning to manage their own time. I mean, that's a huge skill that you know I wish as a system we were more intentional about with all of the students. So I'm going to try to do that the best I can in my class.
Right. So. Very cool. All right. Before you go, I got to ask these questions. This is what we ask everybody. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. Buttered coffee.
Buttered coffee. Bulletproof buttered coffee.
Bulletproof buttered coffee. Yeah.
Tell everybody what kind of butter you got to have.
You got to have Kerrygold. I mean, as long as it's grass-fed.
Grass-fed,
sustainable agriculture,
saturated fat butter.
Right, but I thought I was going to hate it. Basically, it's like getting a nice foamy, latte at the beginning of the day. Yeah, that's allegedly healthy for you.
And then, favorite place to enjoy coffee?
Oh gosh.
Your ideal location?
My back porch in the summertime.
Okay.
Because then it's like you're just there. You're just hanging out.
Tell we're in the day before spring break mindset.
Yeah, pretty much. So.
Well, I just want to thank you. And like I said, I think this is the perspective that we want teachers to see, because you talk about the hurdles, you talk about some of the issues as you were implementing it, and then eventually like the breakthroughs. So that's what we want.
Yeah. It's definitely not perfect, and it's definitely a struggle. But it's made it a lot more manageable and allowed me to focus more on the students, which to me is key. So,
love it. Fantastic. Have a great day, Mr. Sermak.
Happy spring break, everybody.
You as well.
Bye.
Hey, I'll just stop recording.